Welcome to the Just Regular Guys podcast,
where we give our non-expert opinions on the things that matter.
So obviously this is sort of like a test episode, right?
Yeah.
And I think both of us are just feeling like, doing it, getting it done, talking about some things, vocalizing our opinions.
It's extremely frustrating journey of talking about doing it and then never actually doing it. So
Right. So at some point you just got to do it first and then fix it later, which is definitely what this is. So on this journey that we're about to taking now, I know we both have like a lot of different things that we're interested in talking about and various opinions to share, being regular guys with opinions. So I can kind of start with one if we're open to that.
I would love to hear your opinion.
Okay, so a lot has been going on recently. We've been hearing a lot about DOGE, the Department of Government Efficiency. Essentially established by Trump, who is currently the president-elect. We're going to go ahead and date the episode, but it's we'll just say that it is November of 2024. So, Trump was just elected recently and still got a few months until he's president. And so he's making all kinds of cabinet appointments and, lots of things in the news and media about that. And one of the things which, like I said, I feel like I've heard the most about is this idea of the Department of Government Efficiency, which is set to be have two heads, which would be Elon Musk and Vivek Ramaswamy. I believe that's how you say his name.
Ramaswamy is what I usually say, but yeah, it's got a lot of people shaking in their boots.
Yeah. Well, and it's funny because, there'll be plenty to say about this. I mean, I think it's fine to go ahead and just come out and announce or establish that I personally voted for Trump. I think he was a good president the first time. I think he'll be a good president the next time, and I have lots of confidence in that decision. And so to some degree, there's plenty of bias, I guess, in my mind as far as how I believe that the media has projected things and what the common narrative is about what's going on. So
I have a question for you. Did you vote for Trump the first time? Or
No, I didn't.
Yeah, me either.
So, which I actually have some regrets about now, because I think the first time it's kind of complicated, and maybe I won't get into all of it right now, but a portion of what kept me from voting for him the first time was that I was still a little bit bought into some of the controversy, right? And so now I consider myself fully red-pilled and like aware that a whole bunch of stuff that is just false is going on. But at the time I was like, well, I don't think that's true and I don't think that's true, but he's still a scummy guy, right? Like that was kind of my position. And so kind of wish I had, but nonetheless did it this time around.
Yeah, I was on the same boat there. 2016. Well, first of all, growing up, I was the only conservative in my family. Funnily enough, my people that raised me all grew up voting Democrat. I did the fifth grade thing where they explained the political parties, and I was like, yeah, this one makes a lot more sense. So, but 2016, I love The Apprentice. But I love Shark Tank, but I don't think I'd vote for Mr. Wonderful to be president.
Right.
So, I was right there with you. Scummy, hates women, whatever. But man, 2020 comes around and I'm like, that's my president, So he, definitely proved his, ability to lead, and the economy, obviously was the best we've ever had, and hopefully we get that again. But yeah, I just thought that was interesting that both of us, coming from conservative backgrounds, kind of opposed Trump at first, but now at least I can say for myself, ultra MAGA.
Sure, yeah. Well, and I think to some degree it speaks to how effective the machine is, so to speak, because even though some of the more conservative news sources and stuff, where I like to get some of my information and so on, even though they were all pretty fully supporting Trump at that point, I still was kind of had my reservations, and so and I'll tell you, obviously, I mentioned that I was going to talk about Doge, and we'll talk about Doge. But one last thing on Trump and the election is, what I think was such a massive, I don't want to say turning point. It's not like I wasn't on board before this, but something that was just so obvious to me and so indicative of like what reality, so to speak, was the first assassination attempt.
Oh, absolutely.
And first of all, it was, I mean, that's shocking in and of itself. People like to say, oh, assassination attempts happen all the time, you just don't hear about them. It's like, okay, that is true, right? There's lots of times where, somebody claims they're going to do something and they have to, whatever. But in this case, somebody actually did it, and they came very, very close, right?
Shot on live TV.
Yes, exactly. Live TV actually hit him with a bullet. It doesn't matter if it was a little piece of his ear or half of his ear. Like the point is, it was that close. It was that real, and obviously his reaction to it and his response to it. Immediately standing up just moments after, chanting "fight, fight, fight" with his fist in the air, and we got that epic image that is going to hopefully live, be in the history books for forever,
Oh yeah, absolutely.
But yeah, that's a big deal. You can't just you tune into CNN after that and they can spin it how they want. But I mean, that's real. Somebody just had a bullet shot directly at them.
I don't remember if I actually dropped a tear, but I rewatched that, that moment, I don't know, 5-10 times, and it was definitely emotional, right? I couldn't believe that. People would joke about it or say that they should, and given that the media's attitude towards Trump, comparing him to Hitler and stuff, why would you not want to kill him, right? But just to actually see somebody pull that trigger, it was emotional.
Well, I agree with you, and I think I will say this: to play devil's advocate, I think that can sound a little silly, right? If you're someone that's kind of on the fence, or maybe even completely opposes us, disagrees with us, and you're hearing that, you're going to, you probably find that to be just kind of a ridiculous statement that it almost made you cry type thing.
Yeah. Oh, they'll laugh at me. Yeah,
but the thing is, if you do try and take an objective position for a moment, and you kind of try and take your opinion out of the matter, take what you think and what you've heard from different places out of the matter, and just sympathize with the reality of that matter. Okay, this is a man, regardless of his views, his positions, whatever. This is a man running to try, on the claim that he wants to make the country better, and for that, for no other reason, right? Because there's nothing else he's representing. Essentially, he's not, theoretically going to make a bunch of money or anything like that. For no other reason, somebody tried to kill him. Okay. And in the face of that, of having your life, literally threatened in the most real, tangible sense, he still decided to stand up and stand up for, the things that put him there in the first place type thing,
Yeah. And that moment of him actively, he wasn't caring about himself. He didn't know how bad he was hurt. He saw blood. He knew he was hurt. He heard the zing. He felt the warmth or whatever. In that moment, taking a second to let us know that, it wasn't over, right? Him standing up and saying fight,
Fish response. That is a response for the people there. It was a response for the people watching, he was communicating something.
Absolutely.
And so, yeah.
Even the most beta man on earth, Elon Musk, called it badass,
Yeah.
Thought that was funny.
Oh, you know who I think is I don't. Did you mean to say Elon?
No, Mark Zuckerberg.
Okay, that's what I thought you meant to say.
Elon's right there too, but
yeah. No, yeah, Zuckerberg saying that was awesome. All right, so anyway, definitely epic, definitely something of value that I think isn't too quickly overanalyzed, but nonetheless on the Doge topic.
Speaking of Elon Musk.
Yeah, speaking of Elon. So, I'll start with my initial thoughts, right? Which is that it was kind of twofold. One was that, man, that sounds powerful,
Yeah.
like this new, well, theoretically new department of the government or even government agency, maybe in some people's minds, that is pretty much strictly and solely responsible for moderating all of the rest of the government. That is something that, even coming from quote unquote my side, is, has a lot of potential. There's a lot of room for that to have more reach than I think people were signing up for.
Yeah, absolutely. Another thing to fear in regards to that is, in an effort to reduce bureaucracy, you create a new bureau, right? Which, kind of sounds counterintuitive.
Right. Yeah. And so, I did recently learn, I was kind of, getting some more information on like what the reality of the whole suggestion is. And so, first of all, from what I understand, it won't actually be it's not going to be a branch of government. It's not going to be an agency. It's not going to be, it's essentially just going to be like I guess a think tank is one way of putting it, right? Where it's like,
or like a congressional committee, essentially.
Yes. Yeah. More like a committee, something along those lines. Because in order for it to be any of the previously stated things, it would have to be voted on by Congress, which at this point is not even a proposal. It's just, it's just Trump saying, yeah, this is going to happen type thing.
Right.
So that's one, kind of reality check that's worth noting. The other, my other initial thought was, pretty shortly after it was announced and after Elon talked about it, I believe, where was the first place it was mentioned? Was it Elon's Rogan interview, or was it Elon talking to Trump at some point?
I believe Elon was talking to Trump, and it may have just been over Twitter or something, something crazy. But they floated the idea, and Elon was like, "I'd absolutely love to help."
Yeah, right. And so, yeah, exactly. And so at first it was just this idea of like something that Trump's already interested in, which is, getting straight to our national debt and reducing, waste and extra costs and trying to lower taxes, all these things, these kind of long-term goals that I would say his election would mean. They were kind of just spitballing about ways to, head that off, and it kind of turned into this idea of Elon running this government or this department. And so one or another, it didn't take me long to put the pieces together and realize that the Department of Government Efficiency, which is the only thing we heard it referred to as in the beginning,
yeah,
was an acronym. And that acronym was Doge. And before anybody else was calling it Doge in the media or any, Twitter, I hadn't seen a single meme about it yet. I realized that, and I went, oh, this is a meme. Like, it's like, it's Elon kind of like, quote unquote, trolling again. Which honestly at first scared me. And you might remember, I actually texted you. I was like, wait a second. Like, I was like, is this guy serious? Like, is he trying to fill his own pockets? What's going on? I don't know. Like, do you have any thoughts about that?
I think that Elon is a branding genius, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like, you got to remember Tesla. It's got the S3 XY. That's funny. So many, like, they made the cyber quad for kids, right? So many things that point Tesla. His tunnel boring business is literally called the Boring Company. Right. Okay. Which is hilarious because you don't even know what that means if you didn't know. Right.
Right.
I think he thinks he's funny. you
Right.
know, to himself. And
Right.
man doesn't need anything. He's got all the money in the world. So why
Right.
not make yourself laugh? Right?
Yes. Yeah. And I think, honestly, I think I think it is very characteristic. Like, I'm not going to sit here and claim to know Elon, like, you know, on any personal level, but having watched enough content about him and that it features him and those sort of things, like, you know, there are personality traits he has and characteristics he has that everyone's kind of well aware of that you can just see kind of obviously that play out in these certain ways. And I think this sort of thing, his sense of humor and his like willingness to like do something kind of ridiculous just for a laugh is very
I love it. I love it. And he definitely has a thing for acronyms. I think that's evident.
for sure. Yeah.
But also, like, what serendipity? You know, the universe kind of teed that one up for him.
For sure. Yeah, actually, very. Because here's the thing: there's no way that he was like, you know, he pushed Doge, the Doge coin, which I don't think I ever fully made that connection. If anybody happens to be completely unaware, there's a cryptocurrency called Dogecoin that is currently pretty insignificant as far as its, you know, all its stuff, and
It originally was a joke, yeah.
yeah, and it was originally a joke and stuff like that. You know, the very origin of it is just a meme with this weird, you know, little dog. And okay, so is it a few years ago at this point, probably 4 or 5 years ago at this point, Elon pushed Doge pretty hard. You know, Bitcoin was kind of all the rage, and everybody was still kind of asking the question, like, how serious is crypto? Like, what is the future of this thing? And, you know, Elon was kind of appeared to be bought in with the statements he was making. And again, a lot of this stuff seeming to be jokes.
I think it's important to mention real quick, sorry, that Elon did not invent Dogecoin or anything like that. He purely, he's a funny guy. He likes to laugh.
Right. And we also, as far as I'm aware, I don't think anybody knows Elon's personal investment into Doge. Personally, I wouldn't be surprised if it was insane. Like,
right.
I would not at all be surprised to learn that he owns like 70% of the you know, because cryptocurrency, that's one of the things about it is that it's a limited, like they're all limited supply, basically, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. So anyway, all this is just to say, you know, it is ironic that several years ago, you know, he was on Twitter or whatever saying Doge to the moon, and it, you know, got a bunch of hype. That was probably the first time that we saw Doge spike, to be honest. And now he's like literally going to be the head of a department of the government that is unironically named Doge.
Yeah. And I believe Trump, it was either Trump or Vivek said it's going to be a temporary department, you know, which is kind of unfortunate. But I can see in the spirit of cutting costs, not paying people to be on there indefinitely. You know, they get what they need done and then dissolve the department, right?
For sure. Yeah. And I do think that helps with, you know, kind of the initial point that I was talking about, which is that, you know, at first it's like, oh, that sounds like a lot of power. You know, if you put an expiration date on the thing, so to speak, you know, that kind of helps reassure that, okay, there's only so much that they can do in that time.
Right.
But yeah, ultimately, my thoughts now, being a little bit more informed of it and knowing what, you know, it's likely to actually look like, I'm hopeful. You know, Elon promised on one of the last Trump rallies before the election, Elon, you know, basically publicly stated that he planned on cutting $2 trillion from government spending. You know, I don't know if he gave a deadline or not, but, you know, using this department.
Which is just an absolutely absurd amount of money.
Yeah,
There's not
absolutely.
one single person that has $1 trillion.
Right. Yeah. No, it's unthinkable. It's actually literally difficult to comprehend. And the fact that that's only a fraction of our total deficit is even worse. But yeah, so, you know, basically, I don't know for sure that they're going to be able to find $2 trillion. I don't know for sure that that it's going to be, you know, this magic fix-all pill, and Elon and Ramaswamy are just going to put all this money back in our pockets or anything quite that extreme, but I think at the very least, having two people that, in my opinion, I want to say, and I say this with an asterisk, but are not already corrupted by government, right?
Right.
Like two people that you can trust are sort of not a part of the system, so to speak.
The swamp.
Not in the swamp. Having two people like that look for any singular place, any singular amount that is currently objectively waste, and eliminate that. I think that'd be huge.
Well, think about the economic brain power between those three, between
Sure.
Donald Trump, Elon Musk, who I believe is the richest man on earth, and then
Yes.
Vivek, successful pharmaceutical company, which I didn't like at first, but my coworker was telling me that his whole pharmaceutical thing was essentially trying to make cheap American medicine, right?
Mhm.
Because we ship in a bunch. So it was a little bit more moral than Big Pharma, bro. And I hope that's the case. I still haven't dove into it a bunch.
Right. Yeah. I agree. I think one of the first things you see from the quote unquote opposition, right? From I'll just say from the left, right? Kind of generically, because you have some of these mainstream media sources which I believe are extremely biased, terrible at their jobs. As far as the idea and the claim that they're giving you objective news coverage is just a joke.
Yeah, unreal.
Yeah, and so you see sources like that. One of the first tactics that they tend to bear when it comes to certain things like this is to try and essentially kind of defraud the person. It's like Pete Hegseth, I think is his name.
Yeah.
Is one of Trump's recent nominees, and basically the short version, as I understand it, is the guy's got a long career. Served in the military, did all these things. Worked in a college for a while. He graduated from 2 different Ivy Leagues, stuff like that, and so he's like pretty well qualified for a lot of things. But that doesn't stop those same sources that I'm referring to as immediately calling him a quote unquote Fox host because he was on Fox and Friends for a little while. It's just kind of like dishonest at best. And so I feel like that's kind of happening with Elon to some degree, because I've heard people saying, "Oh, Elon didn't actually invent any of the things that his company had. Like he didn't invent any of the software, the mechanics for Tesla and stuff like that." And it's like, okay.
But he may not have invented them, but he was smart enough to go from 0 to 100 with his investments,
Right. At the very least, you don't become the richest guy on earth by accident, right? Like not even a little bit. So there's obviously some large degree of, business and economic understanding there.
And what's absolutely insane, just talking about Tesla, I've been in the car business for a few years now. Their prices on their cheaper vehicles, the 3 and the Y, are absolutely unobtainable for some of these other manufacturers. Like the Ford F-150 Lightning, when it first came out, the invoice price was $20 more than the MSRP. So the dealers had to pay more for the car than they could sell them for. So absolutely absurd. The fact that the Model 3 and the Model Y are as cheap as there are, because what's the next cheapest electric vehicle? That's not some Chinese thing.
No, that's a big deal. And I think even, on that same note, I think it's just inappropriate in general to tie someone who we see as the head of something or the mind behind something to everything that thing then like becomes or does in the future, especially when it comes to like just brands and just what are they called? What are they called? Like companies.
Yeah, like
IPOs, stuff like that.
Yeah, intellectual property.
Oh yeah. Anyway, point is, like, I feel like, to kind of bring it back to Trump for a second, that's one of the issues with Trump is Trump has this very hard set brand at this point with, Make America Great Again. It's got a whole image behind it. It's got, you kind of immediately have all these things that pop into your head when you hear it. and you know,
which,
a lot of,
which
go ahead.
you know, him in his younger years, he never planned on being president, right? He was an entertainer. So like the grab him by the P word stuff, you know, like that was him being an entertainer, and to shift from, you know, this entertainment mogul bachelor essentially, you know, to shift into like a public servant, he's got some stains on his, he had a lot to prove. And I think he has.
Right. Which, you know, there's surely more to say about that particular comment from him, which is, in my opinion, one of the few things that has kind of been lobbed against him, so to speak, that's actually, you know, very creditable and just is exactly what
right.
Is, right. Like, it's not great, you know. There's more of a conversation to be had there, but nonetheless, I agree with you. And I think, you know, the point I was making was, you know, not everybody that walks around on the street wearing a MAGA hat is representative of Trump, and he is certainly not representative of them, you know. And so I think that that's a thing that we just have to keep in mind, especially when it comes to these appointments that we're seeing happen, and with ideas like the Department of Government Efficiency is like, we don't know, you know, it's not Tesla, it's not PayPal, you know, whatever.
Right. Well, in the same vein, you know, Trump, he said it himself, he likes geniuses, right? He and RFK disagree on tons, especially when it comes to the environment and fracking and oil and that kind of thing. But he knows that RFK is smart in other areas and agrees with them in other areas. So using a person's strengths, you know, to fuel your reign that hopefully your legacy that you're building. I think it's smart, and you don't have to agree with everything.
Yeah, I think that's a huge point, and again, maybe a lengthier conversation, but I love that we're seeing, you know, a quote unquote diversity in Trump's cabinet so far.
Diversity of thought, not just of, you know,
right,
appearance.
Right. Diversity in many ways, because, you know, again, this is one of the things that, you know, mainstream media and people on the left and stuff like that love to cling to is, you know, things like DEI are a big controversy right now. Things like gender neutral bathrooms and stuff like that. And it's a lot of what do they call that? Identity politics.
Yeah, which is so funny to attack Donald Trump on when, you know, there are so many clips of him in the 90s and early 2000s, you know, supporting gay marriage. And he was actually the first president to, at the time of taking office, support gay marriage, which I think is very interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I have heard that recently, that, you know, both Hillary and Obama were opposed to same-sex marriage when they were running.
Yep.
And he had already, you know, come out and made statements that he didn't care about that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah.
But yeah, you know, with that being said, you know, he's kind of quote unquote beating them at their own game, so to speak, because, you know, he's already got an African-American man appointed. He's already got multiple women appointed, not just multiple women appointed, but multiple women appointed in historical fashion, as in they are going to hold a position that has never been held by a woman before.
Correct. And guess what? He did that last time too.
Right. And he's got, I guess I don't know the politically correct way to say it, but, you know, people of varying sexual orientations on his in his cabinet so far.
Yeah, what was the recent gentleman? He's the first openly gay man to serve in that position. I forget who it was. That would be good to look up.
I forget who it was and the position, so maybe we can check that. But yeah, you know, obviously, you know, somewhat significant details when the claim is that he's, you know, this very bigoted person that hates these various types of people. And you know,
right, like, that's the point. You know, he's going to support these quote unquote geniuses, regardless of, you know, he likes skilled people. It doesn't matter what they think. You know, right. Quick Google search says it is Richard Grenell. He is the first open member of the LGBT community, and he's the director of national intelligence. So pretty big one to go into too.
Yeah. Yep. Yeah. So I'm looking forward to it. I think he's putting together a great team. I love the fact that he's got two people that I mean, it's almost hard to believe and comprehend. I think the fact that both Tulsi Gabbard
Yeah.
and Robert F. Kennedy Jr. were running as Democrats. Tulsi didn't run this year, if I'm not mistaken.
No, I believe she
ran last election.
She was 2020, yeah.
Yeah, so she ran in the 2020 election against the current president.
Yep.
And
Kamala.
Right, and Kamala, yeah. And RFK Jr. ran this year in the same election that Trump just won. And both of those people are going to be, large parts of Trump's administration, which is just awesome.
What's crazy about it too is RFK got, when you really look at it, obviously there's no way he could have won. However, he did get a substantial amount of votes for a third party, right?
Oh, absolutely.
It's like historically hard to do.
Yes, absolutely. Which is really great. Honestly, it was great to see because I appreciated a lot of RFK's positions on things.
Right.
And there's some stuff out there that's questionable. There's some stuff out there I'm not sure about. That's true of any given person, but there was also a lot that I agreed with, which is not true of any given person. And so to see him ultimately have to kind of bow out of the whole thing was a little disappointing. But for him to still get some resonance with the country and still get a significant number of votes, even when it wasn't even really a possibility,
right?
I think is a valuable thing.
I am really happy that both RFK Jr. and Donald Trump had the grace to work together.
Yes,
because on paper they shouldn't have.
Right. Yeah. Yeah, I think. Again, I think there's so much more that can be said about that, and I think it's really significant. I think if you take a moment to consider that and you don't walk away with that it's significant, then you're not you need to think about it.
Right.
Honestly, if you're really bought into an opposing point of view, and you think, RFK is a sellout or something like that, or whatever opinion it might have, I just encourage you again to just think about it. Just for a second, try and put other things outside of your mind and just think about it critically, think about it logically, and ask yourself how much sense do these different things make, and whatever. I don't know.
I would be interested to see, the level of, obviously we have control of the Senate and presumably the House at this point. I think last I heard they were still counting, but it's going to be the House as well.
Right.
But I would be interested to see, in terms of the actual executive branch, how diverse, this may be one of the most diverse in terms of political standing cabinets in history, right?
Yeah, it very well could be.
Yeah, it's
especially
with how divided and partisan this country has become over the past decade. Since Obama. It's cool to see, people kind of coming together, because Tulsi Gabbard ran as a Democrat, right? She was in the DNC. It wasn't even she was a third party or anything. And to speak on that, Bernie Sanders is on board with helping Trump with the potential credit card limitations there. Have you heard about that?
Interesting. I haven't.
Yeah. So Trump is floating the idea of capping credit card interest temporarily at 10%. And Bernie Sanders is like, this is fantastic. So to get, one of the most left, members of Congress on board with President Donald Trump, how does that happen?
Classically left, too.
Yeah.
Very, yeah, absolutely. That's interesting. Yeah. Well, and, I think that, the one last point that I think is somewhat that everything we're talking about now is indicative of is kind of like the group majority type argument, right? Which, first of all, is not a great argument. At any point, if you're making an argument based on the fact that most people think this, it's kind of
right.
And it is not very meaningful, but I don't think it's completely unmeaningful. And so the little bit of meaning that I think you can derive from that is not only did Trump win, okay, he got a majority of votes, but he also won in a major fashion. He won the popular vote, which is a big deal. Hasn't happened since Bush after 9/11.
Yeah, and historically conservatives are not, great at finding the popular vote.
Yes, exactly. And then on top of that, to have this, this diverse cabinet that we're talking about, and have these, these various minds with various backgrounds, various positions, all kind of coming together to say, we like the main overall objective. I think that's very significant. That really speaks to something more than, I mean, quite frankly, Trump just doesn't have that much pull. Like, he doesn't have that much money to be paying these people off, and he doesn't have that much pull.
Oh, no. And the best part is, speaking of which, he can't run again. So right. he has nothing in this other than maybe like ego of saying like, I'm the one that helped, right? Yeah. Which like he can have it. You know what I mean? He's not taking a salary. He's not, he can't run again. The only thing he could do is maybe, talk good about JD and get him in there,
Right. Yeah. And definitely there's an opportunity to establish a bit of a legacy, or even, the ego argument does go a long way with Trump.
Yeah.
I think we can all agree on that. But even if it's just kind of like, I want to go down in the history books, you know what I mean? I want to be one of the most, I've heard a lot of people arguing that he might be the most, what is the word they're using? Not pivotal, but
influential, perhaps.
Influential, something like that. Like, basically this second term, this presidency might be have one of the greatest and longest lasting effects of any president we've ever seen, which is a really big statement. That's a really big, I mean, if you think about the likes of, several great presidents. I mean, you have obviously the goated father, George Washington.
Yeah. The man, the myth, the legend.
Yeah. The man himself. You have Abraham Lincoln. You have, plenty of other things.
Yeah. Abraham Lincoln he's got to be, top 3 for sure.
Probably holding on to the number 1 seed right now, I would imagine.
I would imagine.
And so, if they really think that, the way I understand it is, if all the promises come true, that will likely be true. That he will have been that effective. So,
we'll see. Just the way that the divisiveness was growing, like it literally feels like it would almost be easier to split into 2 different countries, right? Like it's essentially kind of like a neo-civil war, right? To a certain degree.
Yeah, that's interesting.
So in the same way that Abraham Lincoln, saved the country and kept it as one, I mean, Donald Trump might do something maybe not as drastic, but certainly, as impactful.
Yeah, and obviously not as literal either, right? Like that's the concept behind it being a neo, civil war.
Correct. Yeah.
But yeah, I absolutely agree. I think the potential is there, and I think everyone feels like that division is there, which can kind of segue us into another point, which is social media.
Yeah, perfect.
So, social media for the last, what has it been now? 3 weeks, 4 weeks?
Yeah, around there.
It's been crazy. Like I stated openly, I'm a conservative. I voted for Trump. I'm in agreement with a lot of his positions, so on and so forth. And I make these same positions of mine known pretty openly, pretty publicly, but usually not like, I'm not just like going around touting like, oh yeah, my president won, you lose type, like anything like that. I believe in being a lot more civil, a lot more respectable. I believe in conversation. Like a really, really big, important piece of life for me is being able and willing to converse about pretty much anything. And so I don't want to completely shut out, large groups of people in my life to where they're not willing to have a conversation with me because of the way that I present my beliefs. Now, if they're not willing to have a conversation with me just because of my beliefs, just because I hold them at all, then okay, that's a different thing. But like, it's definitely able to be my fault that that's the case, right? And so, social media has been a little bit crazy. I don't know if you've experienced this much.
Yeah,
yourself.
Absolutely. My For You page and my feeds are, I don't know why. I think social media thinks that I'm a leftist because I get the funniest stuff on there.
Yeah, I don't know. I've definitely seen a lot of both sides as well. And I think a part of it is just that both sides are getting traction, right? There's a lot of people that quite frankly have found the devastating disappointment of people who voted for Kamala Harris to be amusing.
Unfortunately, but
tis
the season.
Exactly. Right.
It comes around once every 4 years. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And this just speaks to what we were already talking about, which is the division in the country. Quite frankly, there was always going to be some percentage of that happening, like aggressive, like you lose kind of reactions on social media or in private circles and stuff like that at the family, at the dinner table at Thanksgiving.
And how incredibly dumb.
Oh, for sure.
Like that is youth brain. Like, haha, red team win, haha. Like,
yes.
Like, am I happy about it? Absolutely. Am I proud? Am I, thrilled that we were able to come together, and people from all walks of life, by the way, but not to throw you in a statistics there, Devin, but the black turnout for Trump this year was fantastic, except for in black women. He had historic highs in pretty much every demographic except for black women. Yeah. And so, with that being said, I think you're right. I think it's at the very least, I don't want to say detestable, but it's like, it's not cool. It's not chill. It's not anything to be proud of if you're out there, like, literally bashing people and like trying to, ultimately, if you're trying to make them feel worse when they obviously are already feeling bad, like, that's just not great. That's not a good look. If anything, try to welcome them, be like, hey, I hope Trump, proves himself to you over the next 4 years. Like, that's really all you can say, right? That's
exactly what I was going to say, is essentially prove them wrong. Like, don't prove them right. Like, oh, MAGA's so bad and they're all hateful people and they have these terrible views and whatever. Like, if the fruit that you're bearing, so to speak, or the actions that you're taking are indicative of that, then you're just proving them right. But like, if you counter that and you show that there's actually logical, rational minded people who are invested in quote unquote the truth, okay, then that's
but I know why it's tempting. Oh,
for sure.
My wife, for example, she just shared where she had reported Facebook comments saying, I hope Trump supporters die, or Trump supporters aren't human. These particular comments, right? She reported them and, they were found to not be against community standards or whatever. Despite saying, I think there was one that actually said, I'm going to kill, which is like a straight up, like, you can't say that. You can't say that at all about anybody.
Right.
You couldn't say that about, an actual murderer, so.
Right.
The fact that it's okay, but meanwhile, some tamer comments, about like abortion or, something like that, which is a heated topic, but tamer comments not calling for death, get censored. It's unreal.
Yeah. Yeah. And, there's definitely a lot to that, but hopefully, to the point we were already making, hopefully we start to see some of that change, right? And we start to, my hope is that after about 2 years, some decent percentage of people who voted for Kamala, right? Like I think the exact demographic I'm hoping exists is people that were on the fence, but didn't trust Trump, right? And instead were buying into some of the lies and that sort of thing. Excuse me for 1 second. But anyway, people in that position that went ahead and voted for Kamala, maybe they weren't super all in on her either. And what my hope is that after, about 2 years of things being, I'll say normal at the very least. Quite frankly, if he doesn't do anything at all, that would be better than what their expectation is. Correct. And so if that happens, that maybe they'll come around and go, okay, it seems like there was more to this whole situation, which I think is inevitably going to happen. At the very beginning, we were talking about how neither of us were fully sold on 2020, and now we are, right? That is just the longer that he is allowed to exist and he is not actually Hitler.
Right. Kind of proves that he's not Hitler, right?
Right. Exactly. The more people that are going to wake up,
That's hilarious.
And, with that being said, the kind of the main point that I'm, that I had in mind about social media is just that, like, it's kind of hard to disagree with people today. And it's hard to, like, there's a particular person who I obviously I'm not going to name, but there's a particular person I'm friends with who I think I probably could not be more opposed to, so to speak. Like, I'm not opposed to them personally. That's not what I mean. But just like our viewpoints are exactly antithetical.
But still maintaining a friendship.
Yeah, and still able to be friends. And, with that being said, we haven't, been close in a while, but still, funny enough, they did unfriend me recently.
Wow.
On at least one media platform. We're still friends on another, and I'm not really sure why that is. But, it's funny because I don't really mind that they unfriended me. In fact, to some degree, I almost think it's better. Not because I don't want to see what they have to say, but if what I'm saying is that bad to them that they feel like we can't even be friends anymore, then, like, okay, all right, sure, that's a cost I'm willing to pay.
Because then you almost self-censor a little bit, right? Like, you're like, I don't want Jeff to be upset with me, so I'm not going to share this, right?
Right. Which, that's kind of a, I don't know. That's something I'm personally not very comfortable doing. I try and always speak in a fashion and try and, like I already said, to some degree, present myself in a way that, I mean, I'm definitely not like sucking up to people or like trying to, I don't want everyone to like me. That's not a concern I have. But, again, I also think it's inappropriate to go around touting your particular views and beliefs, especially on things that are really personal to people and really controversial, like abortion, for instance, so strongly that, again, you're going to just section off a whole group of people. That's just like, especially considering those are the people that quote unquote need to hear it, right? Like, if you really want to stand in opposition to abortion and you want to, convince some people that it is immoral, let's say, obviously all the people who are not going to unfriend you as a result of that opinion probably already share the opinion or something along those lines, right? So, like,
or it's not super important to them.
Right. Yeah. So the people who it is the most pertinent to, theoretically, are the ones who are going to be turned away by the way you go about things like that.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, you need some subtlety on that,
Yeah. Now, with all this being said, I honestly wasn't really good, didn't bring this up to talk about my contribution to social media, but instead other people's, which has been very heated. A lot of people very, similar to the first time Trump was elected, very shortly after, the common narrative that you saw from everybody that opposed Trump was that he was the worst thing that's ever happened. And it's kind of more of the same this time around, especially with regard to Project 2025, which was this big scare tactic of, complete falsity that, that everyone was associating with Trump and claiming he was going to enact and stuff like that. It's like, I don't know.
I think we should, I'll throw it out there right now. The Just Regular Guys Foundation should write a, Project 2029 or whatever it would be for the Democratic Party. What if we made up some stuff?
Sure, yeah, we can present it, and
we can put it out there, see what they think.
We'll just call up mainstream media, be like, "Hey, I heard they're doing this. It's crazy." But yeah, so I don't know. I don't know if there's a better point to be made, but just in general, it is tough. The division feels real. It feels real, and it feels close to home. I think that's one of the things. There's so many times when it comes to politics are this kind of like, it kind of feels like a layer above your actual life. In my experience, like, there's my actual life where I wake up every day and, I get to hang out with my daughter and I go to work and, like, all this. That's real life. That's like that's the closest to home and the things that I perceive as the realist, so to speak. And so you take something like politics, which is this big, like, not just national, not just national, but global, thing that all kinds of people are contributing to. And it just kind of feels a little surreal sometimes, where it's just like, it's disconnected.
Yeah, it's kind of like a force, right? Like it's its own being almost.
Zone B, is that what you said?
Its own being.
Oh, its own being, yes.
But I like Zone B, though, too.
I was like, wait, what does that mean?
Other.
I'm not familiar with this terminology.
But no, like it's like a living thing, right? Like, and the rules of it are constantly changing.
Right. Yeah. And the effects that it, has and stuff like that. And so that is what I think has been the most interesting and also kind of like consequential of the way that social media has felt to me personally recently, is that it's kind of bringing that layer a little closer. A little closer to the first layer, the foundational layer of like quote unquote real life. Like,
right. It's starting to affect your real life.
Exactly. Yeah. Like, here's a person that I actually know, that I've hung out with many times and, have known for years, that sort of thing, that like is saying the same stuff that I hear on, this big podcast that I listen to, that, whatever. It's just like, it's weirdly reeling things in, and yeah, the division is kind of the biggest part of it, right?
So what's interesting and kind of scary about that is, these newer, younger kids, right? They're new to social media. They're new to really thinking politically at all. Most of them probably haven't, right? I shared my story about, being in 5th grade government class or whatever. I don't even know if they still do that. So what I'm saying is they're young, they're hopping on these platforms for the first time, and they're seeing this new information, and nobody wants to feel othered, right? And when you're so aggressively against, Republicans, conservatives, and these people that are new thinkers, right? They're being exposed to this information for the first time. Of course, they're going to pick the quote unquote good guys, right? Even though, that's what they're being told isn't true at all.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point. And honestly, that's something else. Like that's actually very relevant to social media, because when I'm on social media and I'm scrolling, whatever, and I see this video that is just someone touting kind of the most crazy extreme opinion that I've ever heard, like, they're fairly often very young. I'm not saying that that those ideas only come from young people, but they're fairly often very young. And I just keep having to be reminded, like, as I get older and I get more and more distant from being, the youngest generation, that, there's a whole new, like, an entire new generation of people voted this year.
Yeah.
And the next time around, that's gonna be 2 new generations and that sort of thing. And it is kind of crazy, especially because they are way more bought in, way more invested in social media and all of the effects that it has. Right. So.
Correct. And, the argument to that is, the internet makes information, the internet makes information more available. However, that's true and false information, right? And it's really easy to point the fingers at what you claim to be false.
Yeah. Yeah. Which I think can pretty well guide us right into what is, for me, the last talking point, so to speak, which is not social media, but actual media.
Wow, look at that.
Yeah.
Crazy good segue there.
That was, I don't know. What can I say? By actual media or mainstream media or legacy media, which, all these terms that it's kind of taken on these days. It's basically the news, right? Like when I was a kid, we just called it the news.
Right.
You turned on any given TV and you scrolled through whatever channel. It didn't matter if you had cable, satellite, local, like, you were just picking up local channels. You could flip a few channels and you'd find a news station, right?
You tune into their programming.
Yeah. And they were, I've always recognized that they were somewhat similar, right? Like I never saw big differences between any of the big names, let alone even the smaller, like, local stations were fairly similar in the way they reported and the way it looked, stuff like that. Well, basically, I think today, in this day and age, we kind of bundle those all into one group for a pretty good reason, which is that they're all one group.
Yeah.
Like there's pretty clear and obvious signs, not just ownership. Ownership is a big one. You can follow
group.
Yeah, you can follow the owners of different media conglomerates, like all the way to the top. And there's like, I think 3 people. Is that sound accurate?
Yeah, I mean the Sycamore Group is a huge one, and it, reaching quote unquote both sides of the aisle. So it's really just canned info.
Yeah. Yeah, so that's basically the thing is this in this day and age, I'll say it's just a lot more obvious that all of these various, like, it doesn't matter what channel it's on or if it has a different name, if it's MSNBC, CNN, or a different combination of letters, like they're all very similar in not just what they're reporting but how they're reporting it. And I think the big problem with that, well, there's a few big problems with that. In my opinion, one of the biggest problems with that is not just that they all hold the same position, but that the position that they hold is so blatantly like bias.
Yeah, what's really interesting, because this didn't used to be the case. People would turn in to see very specific reporters and listen to, their take on things, right? Like how they thought. Now, when someone reads a news report, it's very much them reading a report, not necessarily giving their opinion, even if it's masked like that.
Yeah, and there's still a difference, I guess, between like actual journalists and a lot of the reporters, which are kind of what we're what probably comes to mind when you hear what we're talking about now. But still, I agree that it's often presented as being something that's a lot more unique and kind of like genuine, I'll say, when all the evidence points to the fact, to the idea at least, that it is, it's the opposite of those things. It's prescribed, it's pre-written, it's, I don't know, all these things.
Well, and just just to throw out there, it's like there's a hive mind of some kind, right? Like, we joked when JD Vance was nominated to be the vice president, Trump's running mate, that everyone, it seemed like instantly everyone was using the word weird, right? Which, like, when in the previously, like, the word weird was kind of like dying off a little bit, right? Like, when's the last time you heard weird in a like professional setting, right?
Well, and to give some kudos to social media, which we were previously talking about in a slightly different light, thank goodness for that. Thank goodness for social media in some of these cases where we can literally, like, multiple things. One, if somebody claims, during his last rally, Trump said this. Well, in the year 2024, it's pretty easy to go find out for sure, for 100% fact, watching video, as to whether or not that's the case. Now, I honestly think, it's kind of funny, and I don't necessarily want to like get off on this separate conversation, but I actually have constructed the argument that we're currently at the peak of technological like validity, I think is the way I would put it.
Like, it's going to go downhill, with AI.
You're right, exactly, because the introduction of AI and just the resources that we have at our fingertips at this point, as far as people being able to edit things easily, I think like the year of like, it's on camera is actually behind us already. We're actually starting back downhill into like you can't trust anything. But
wow, yeah.
But nonetheless, as of right now, you can still pretty easily look up a video and find out for yourself. And so. That's where I saw, like, the point you just made about all of a sudden everybody on these various different platforms, various different media outlets, various reporters and so on, were all suddenly just saying that JD Vance was weird and just using that same term. You can find entire like videos of this all compiled together, like one after the other. You see it, and it's just, I don't know, it's so enlightening as to like what's going on,
and you know what, they did the same, I just remembered, they did the same thing after the vice presidential debate, only with the word slick. They said he delivered the line slickly. Oh, he's a slick talker.
Slick. Yes.
And what the hell is slick?
Right. Well, and the takeaway from that, from what I heard, was essentially like JD did great in his debate.
Absolutely.
His presidential debate, he did an excellent job. It's pretty hard to say otherwise, or even make much of a case for like what he could have done better. Like, he really just did a great job.
Absolutely.
And I think that was kind of the problem, was like all of these sources that didn't want to give him like credit and didn't want to say, oh, you did a great job. They had to find some other way to say that he like pulled it off, like he did it. He did all right, so they just said, he had a slick, this, I don't know.
Which I have to say, not that it matters at this point, but I do think Walz had a decent debate as well, like given the circumstances, because he had to pretend that a lot of things that weren't true or that are true weren't true, and he had a couple goofballs. But,
well, and honestly, I'll say this: even outside of position, like true, not true, whatever. It's been a little while since we've seen civility,
right,
and true, meaningful discourse with regard to any kind of debate or any kind of sit down disagreement sort of thing. And so that was one of the things that was really commendable about their debate, was that I felt like both sides did a pretty good job of not getting really personal, not doing like the whole defamation route of like, oh, well, you said this bad thing for 14 years ago or anything like that. Like, we didn't see a lot of that. It was instead just pretty good, honest back and forths about their differing opinions.
And more importantly, two things more importantly. One, they actually talked about solutions, and two, they both felt like they wanted to solve the issues, right?
Yeah, for sure. I do agree. I think now, it's kind of, I'll admit my own bias here and say it's honestly difficult for me to say that about Tim Walz, because some of Tim Walz's positions that he's known to hold are so, like, I disagree with him so strongly.
He said something about the Medicare individual mandate, the fee for not having health insurance. He said that was a good idea. That's the worst take I've ever heard.
Yeah, well, and so it's kind of hard to sit here and say like, oh yeah, well, he seemed like he cared, and he seems like he has good intentions, like, but that was at least the appearance, I would say, that he was able to present that evening, which I think was ultimately to his benefit, despite the turnout. I don't think you can watch that debate and say, he screwed this up or something like that.
Correct, but that's old news. But
Yeah,
they did
sure.
certainly, try to spin it that way on the mainstream media,
Right.
attacking Vance, saying he's some kind of like manipulator, slick talker,
Yes.
and then obviously didn't cover all the gaffes of Mr. Walz there.
Yeah. And so you can call it opinion if you want, but like I said, I feel like at this point it's pretty objective and pretty clear that mainstream media is going down the drain. I mean, statistically, this is true. Their viewership numbers on a lot of different channels. I mean, morning shows that used to be super popular, all kinds of stuff, just really not doing so great anymore. And I'll even go a step further and say there's not really an exception. We don't see an exceptional channel or an exceptional reporter or anything like that that's still managing to do really, really well amongst everyone else. Like, it's kind of all in one lump sum beginning to be more dismissed. I do think social media plays a large part of that because, like we said, there's two new generations of people. They're not turning on their TVs and going to channel 12. They're opening their phone. They're going straight to things like TikTok and Instagram and whatever. But I think the other part of that is people's eyes are being opened due to, Trump has a huge role to play in this. There's no doubt about that. During his first term, one of the things we heard him say the most was, fake news.
Yeah.
And, he was kind of pointing that out. He was kind of saying like, hey, by the way, these guys are lying,
Yeah, which is crazy. It's because he wasn't benefiting from it, right? So he wasn't afraid to point out the fact like, hey, these people aren't giving me airtime, which is funny because, in the 90s and 2000s, he would call the news and, call talk show hosts and just talk to them all the time. Like, even during 9/11, he called into the news. It was like, yeah, I could see the buildings from my, office, and there's nothing there now. How weird. He would call in and talk to these news stations. Then he decides he's going to run for president, and they want nothing to do with him. You know, like
Right.
you could kind of see that firsthand.
Yeah, well, and I think, something that's resurfaced recently. I mean, I just saw this for the first time a week or two ago. That is so like just goes to prove this so much. Is there's the morning talk show The View,
Yeah.
which I don't think that I can say much at all about that show without getting pretty inflammatory.
Nasty woman.
I don't think. Yeah, there's just, in my opinion, not a lot of good things that can be said about the show. But nonetheless, the show used to have good ratings. Now it doesn't. Whatever. One thing that's really interesting is when Trump was very first, like very, very early on in deciding he was going to run the first time, they had him on. Okay. He seemed very friendly with people. He hugged each one of the hosts, and went on to do this whole episode with them where generally speaking, people were being pretty cordial and they were making jokes. They were laughing at his jokes, things like that. Pretty much 6 months after that, and ever since, that same show has been full sending.
Yeah.
The idea that this is like one of the worst men to ever walk the earth.
Right.
And so it's like, that's like a big light switch kind of flicking moment where it's like, what the heck happened?
Turn against the machine, man.
Yeah, like what changed so much? Because just a few months ago, I watched the same show, and you guys were all pretty friendly.
Yeah.
Now you're saying,
yeah. What do you mean? I thought we liked this guy.
Yeah, detestable things about him. So, yeah, but yeah. So I mean, that's pretty much wraps up my thoughts. Mainstream media is for the birds.
Yeah, I do really like the term legacy media because it's
legacy.
It's kind of means like antiquated, right? Like it's the
Right.
old way of doing things. And
Right.
we talked a lot about, the newest two generations that are growing up. I think it's very realistic that many of them won't even own a television. You know what I mean?
Sure.
Like
yeah.
other than potentially for like an Xbox or something, they can watch Netflix on their laptops. I think it's a very real possibility that TV sales decline.
Yeah, sure. Yeah, no, I agree. I do think legacy is a better term. I think it's more indicative of like what the reality is, and yeah, I mean, I think if you, I mean, but this I guess will be my final point on the matter, which is that if you have heard these opinions and aren't necessarily inclined to agree with them, maybe you're still getting a lot of your information from what we have coined legacy media. Well, we haven't coined it that, but what we're referring to as legacy media.
I'll take the credit.
yeah, Ethan came up with it. But if that's the case, if that's still like one of your main sources of information, I encourage you heavily to just like, I'm not saying we need you voting for JD Vance in 2028 or anything like that, but seriously, it would be worth looking for another source of information and just comparing the two, like just play contrast with what you can find. And obviously that other source of information, you have to be careful, is not basically the same source, because if you compare MSNBC and CNN, like we already said, they're the same, they're pulling from the same pot.
Yeah, watch the Young Turks or Russell Brand or something.
Yeah, watch someone on YouTube that is a personal journalist, and or even something overseas, like some of the British coverage of our news is pretty.
Yeah, Sky News from Australia seems to be pretty good too. But and we say that selfishly because we're tired of the same debates.
Right.
We want to have actual conversation, and it's hard to do that when it's the same thing every time.
Yeah, really, genuinely, it's because people are subscribing to these same trains of thought, okay, and everybody's sharing. You get into the whole echo chamber conversation, right? And ultimately, like when I sit down to have a conversation with that friend I mentioned earlier that that unfollowed me on one source and that we've known each other for a while, like I can bet my next paycheck that I'm going to hear specific things from them that I know were originally publicized, so to speak, on some of those sources. And so Yeah, we just want diversity of thought. That's what I'm rooting for.
And another thing, go directly to the source. When people started talking about Project 2025, the first thing I did was actually pull up the proposal, right? Like, and start reading it for myself. Well, there's a lot. I skimmed it, you know.
Right.
But to see what in the world this was, and then you go, okay, so it's written by the Heritage Foundation. Let's look into them. You know what I mean? So, like, go directly to the source in some of these cases too, especially when it comes to like police reports or legislation, right?
Yeah, and there's not much of an excuse for doing otherwise. Especially like if you're a person that wants to think critically and wants to be well informed and wants to know what the truth of any given situation is, then you just can't be making excuses for doing anything less than, you know, doing your homework, doing your due diligence, and trying to find information from both, you know, kind of both sides of the coin, so to speak. So,
and that's just our opinion. Thank you guys for listening.
Opinion. Just two regular guys. So, yeah. Yeah, I don't have much more to say.
Yeah, catch you guys on the next one.
All right. Thanks for listening.